Lots of women I speak to, some of them do really well on HRT, some don't tolerate it at all. And we do think that potentially this estrobolone could be one of the reasons why that happens. Fish fingers are a really good source of omega-3s. Baked beans are a really good source of fibre. We've just got to make things a lot easier for ourselves. Life is hard enough. Some of the loudest voices, particularly on social media, they're not qualified to be talking about nutrition. That really worries me. And that's when you start to, people start to demonise things like oats.
Hi, I'm Carey and welcome to the Eat Nourish Love podcast. For over 20 years, I've created events, raised over 4 million for good causes, and been lucky enough to meet some incredible people along the way. This podcast is about exploring stories and insights that really shape us, with inspiring guests from wellness, business, self-care and personal growth. It's about learning to trust our intuition and discovering what truly matters, and how, with hard work, belief and tenacity, we can make so many things happen.
So I'm really excited to welcome Emma Bardwell onto the Eat Nourish Love podcast today. This is the second time, Emma, you've been with us. I'm so excited because you've just released another book. Just a little bit of background. You're a registered nutritionist, a Sunday Times bestselling author, and your tips are so practical and clear and obviously evidence-based approach to nutrition. You're a trusted voice in the space, and I think what is so lovely about you is the fact that all your information is not overwhelming. It's just really good tips and tricks about what you do. And obviously you've had two Sunday Times bestsellers or just one?
Well, currently just one, but we're working on the other one. It came out last week, so it's still early days. But yeah, I'm happy with one, to be honest.
Okay. So your new book is The Fibre Effect, and I think this is so relevant to where we are at the moment. And I think there's so many myths, and it's often the forgotten part of nutrition, isn't it? Hugely forgotten. So welcome to the podcast today.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me not once, but twice. I'm honoured.
Love it. So what instigated you into the nutritional world to begin with?
I kind of did a career pivot. So in my 40s, let's say in my 30s, I worked in advertising and I actually got made redundant, and I used that as my chance to retrain and do something completely different. And nutrition was always a real kind of love of mine. And I just decided, I'd done lots of kind of short courses, and I decided to quit everything and to, do a degree. I'm currently studying for a master's. So it's definitely been a really good move, put it that way. And I guess at the beginning, I really focused in on women's health, and particularly menopause actually, and perimenopause, because I was going through that in my 40s when I was training. And I just kind of realized that there was this real chasm whereby the information just wasn't really getting through. And I think there was a lot of kind of confusion about women's health. And even now we know that it's under-researched, it's not really talked about very much. And so, yeah, that was my lead in. And actually it's been a really great topic, a great area to niche in, because menopause and women's health has obviously become huge since then. And we talk about it a lot more now than we used to.
Yeah, I think there's a huge amount of information out there, and you're right, it's coming to the fore much more. But I think also there's a lot of noise around it too, and sometimes it's confusing. Do I fast? Do I eat fibre? Do I eat protein? Do I eat fast in the morning? Do I eat it with fruit? Do I eat with yogurt? So it goes on, doesn't it? So why fibre? Why did you write this book on fibre?
Yeah, so originally when I spoke to you last time, I was talking about my 30-gram plan, which was these kind of 3 pillars. Possibly 4, depends if people were looking into weight loss or not, but it was about eating 30 grams of protein per meal, 30 grams of fibre a day, and 30 different plants a week. And essentially I'd just taken that research and kind of packaged it up into this lovely plan that people really enjoyed, because, like you say, it kind of cut through a lot of the noise and the confusion and just kind of spelled things out for women. A lot of my clients were saying could you just tell me what to eat? And so essentially in that plan, that's what I was doing. And then I think last year, really, protein got a lot of the headlines and a lot of the spotlight for good reason, because we know that it's incredibly helpful for lots of different things. But I did feel that fibre was kind of missing out a little bit, in terms of getting the spotlight. So I wanted to really put it to the forefront. And so this book that I've just released called The Fibre Effect really just hones in on all the benefits of fibre, which are myriad, as you know, because you've read it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's great, but it's all the recipes and everything else, because half of it is also how people bring that into their daily life. So just talk to us about the science behind fibre and the gut.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I'll keep it kind of short, but I think traditionally we've always associated fibre with doing regular poos, with digestion. We kind of associate it with bran and roughage, and it's not particularly sexy. And I think perhaps that's why it hasn't got, stolen the limelight in the same way perhaps as protein has. But we now know that obviously it has all these other benefits too. So we know that it fills us up, it keeps us full, it gives us that lovely kind of feeling of contentment and satiation, which impacts our appetite signals. It stops us snacking throughout the day and grazing. And it kind of prevents those cravings that I think a lot of women talk about. A lot of my clients will say, I just feel hungry all the time. And actually making sure that you're eating enough fibre, because it is bulky, and it kind of is quite, there's a lot of volume involved. That physical filling up in your stomach can actually be incredibly beneficial when it comes to things like weight maintenance. But we also know that it is broken down in the large intestine and it feeds our gut microbes, the gut microbiome, which is something that we are being talked about. It's being talked about a lot in the media these days. And we know that when the microbes break that fibre down, they produce these compounds called short-chain fatty acids. And these compounds then kind of are transported throughout the body, including to your brain, and they can help with things like mood, but they can also help with things like energy, with appetite. So, there's this kind of GLP-1 association. And they can also help with hormone health as well. So honestly, the benefits of fibre are huge, and I go into them in much more detail in the book. And we know from research that people who eat more fibre lead longer, healthier lives. It comes down to not just how you feel now, but it's also very much a preventative kind of nutrient as well.
Is that the same for men and women?
Yeah, it absolutely is. We know that in the UK, 96% of us, which is huge, are not reaching those 30 grams of fibre that are recommended by SACN, which is the advisory board, nutrition advisory board. So that means only 4% of us are reaching those goals. And we know that out of those 4%, women, sadly, seem to be worse than men. And we kind of touched on it, didn't we, at the beginning when we were talking off air, that I think a lot of people associate fibre with, it is carbohydrate. And a lot of women, unfortunately, associate carbohydrate with weight gain. So they're like, oh, I can't eat beans because they're too carby and I'll put on lots of weight, which is such a shame because it means that they're missing out on this, this wonderful nutrient that actually has the opposite effect. It actually really helps to fill us up. And what we know is because it's quite hard to break down, because it's a complex carbohydrate, actually you're not even absorbing all of those calories from real kind of high fibre foods. So actually it's a really good inclusion to have if you are trying to lose some body fat.
Some people are quite nervous of fibre too as well, because sometimes it can give them extra gas and wind, and particularly beans. And some people, I mean, I don't know what you think about that. Some people find that they are not very tolerant of things like that.
I know. Yeah, it's a real shame, isn't it? Because I think what happens is they try them and then they're like, oh, actually, I just can't tolerate beans, and then they never touch them again. Actually, what I think is happening. One of the biggest problems is that people try to go from kind of this small intake. So at the moment in the UK, the average intake is 16 grams a day, which is, about half of what we should be consuming. So they hear that they should be eating double that, and they try to kind of ramp it up overnight. And unfortunately, as you've said, the side effects can be quite debilitating for you, but also for those around you, right? And nobody wants to kind of feel really bloated and uncomfortable and like you can't, you've got to undo your jeans and all of those things. So yeah, the key though, and I go into this in the book actually, I've got a 4-week plan which goes from microdosing, so literally a teaspoon of beans right the way through to half a can 4 weeks later. And I kind of handhold you through that process, because we do need to increase very incrementally and very gradually and slowly. You can kind of think of the gut almost like a muscle. You wouldn't go into a gym and suddenly start deadlifting, your body weight. And similarly, you shouldn't do that with fiber. So we want to really kind of notch up so that your gut can adjust.
Do you think there are people who are intolerant for some people just can't cope with it? With that sort of, with particularly pulses, I think people can sometimes be a bit intolerant of me.
I think there probably is, yeah, absolutely, but I think it's a far fewer than we, than people think. I think most people can tolerate them, but they do have to put in a little bit of work. And actually, one of the things, there's lots of kind of hacks that you can use, but using a pressure cooker can be really helpful, because it actually helps to break down those fibers almost before you start eating them. Chewing really, really well. Again, you're breaking them down in your mouth. That's the kind of first stage of digestion. And opting for things like lentils as opposed to beans while you're building up that kind of resilience, I think can also be very helpful, because again, they're much easier to break down.
And also, obviously, when we're talking about beans, and what about if you puree them or you make them into hummus or chickpeas, whatever it is that still very good, or do you recommend you eat them whole?
No, it's such a good point. And actually, that is a great entry point into eating them, because, yeah, you don't lose any of the fiber. They're broken down. So again, they're much easier to digest, and they've still got all the wonderful nutrients in them. I think another thing that you can do is to, rather than looking at dried beans, which is really kind of elite level, I would always say get tinned. Because again, they've been almost kind of broken down in the water that they're tinned in, and they're already cooked for you. And I would also say rinse them, triple rinse them under running water, because that helps to get rid of these things called oligosaccharides, which are the kind of fermentable fibers that can interact in your gut.
Talking about fermented food, what's your feeling on fermented food as well for the gut?
Yeah, I really like it. Do you include
I
food?
I love chopping up sort of vegetables and you're putting them in the mother cider vinegar. I love it, and often do it.
Oh, like a pickle.
I love pickled onions. Well, not pickled, not the traditional pickled onions, but I love slicing red onions and putting them into cider vinegar and water with some bay leaves and peppercorns and things like that, and just popping those in the salads. They're just lovely. Yeah, really.
So good. And a lovely pop of colour too, right? So they're kind of full of the fermented kind of goodness, but they're also full of polyphenols too, which we know acts like a fibre and can, again, your gut microbes really like those brightly coloured foods.
I think people were often put off because when we talk about fermented foods was the sort of the sauerkraut you used to get in Germany. We lived in Germany for quite a few years because my husband was in the army. So sauerkraut was like, oh, because sometimes you get some pretty nasty sauerkraut.
Bit full on.
Yeah, exactly. So,
but yeah, people make it now, it's very, very easy to make, and you can make it to your kind of specification almost. But yeah, I think, to answer your question, fermented foods are brilliant. They are, they've got these live bacteria in them. We don't know really how much of those live bacteria actually make it through your stomach acid, which obviously breaks down things incredibly well, including some of those live bacteria. but they taste great, and I think it's definitely worth having them in your diet. So live yogurt, kefir is really nice as well. That's really easy to make at home, actually. And you can often find it in the chilled aisle now. Most supermarkets will have kefir. My tip is actually to look for, in the kind of, what's it called, like the international sections tend to be better for things like that. So you actually are getting the real kind of McCoy. So things like Polish kefir is often much better than the ones that are made here, much cheaper too, actually.
Yeah, that's such a great tip. But you've got to get back to the understanding where fermented food came from, because it was before we had refrigeration, before we had fridges, and and so it was a way to preserve food, wasn't it? So so it's a very traditional way, and the gut was very used to that. Let's go on to vegetables as well, because obviously, and you have the most amazing amount of the shopping list, and you do it for vegan and vegetarian, and love your book, so good. But let's talk about vegetables and fiber. So what would be your top tips in terms of your top sort of 6 vegetables really when it comes to fiber?
Yeah, so I'm just looking in the book. I've called them my fiber heroes, actually.
Right.
And I think the nice thing is there's nothing far-flung or exotic, in my lists. These are all things that you can get from your corner shop, from any kind of supermarket, and they don't cost the earth either. So when I'm talking about vegetables in particular, we're talking about things like broccoli. We're talking about peas, frozen peas. Everybody's got a pack of frozen peas in their freezer.
Yeah.
They're incredibly brilliant for fiber, but they're also really high in protein too. So it's like this kind of double whammy, and cheap too, right? And if you buy frozen foods, obviously they don't go off, so they're much more sustainable and budget friendly too. Beans obviously come up a lot. Beans and lentils are a real kind of heroes in my lists. Sweet potatoes, but also just regular potatoes. I think we often overlook the humble potato, don't we? But they are, particularly if you're eating the skin, which I think is the best bit, like a really nice kind of crispy jacket potato. That skin you can't beat it, can you?
Sometimes I like taking the middle out, funny enough, and just having the skin and putting some avocados and whatever into it, and eating it almost like a sort of sandwich. I love crispy potatoes.
So good. My kids won't eat it, so I'm always like, saying, "Oh my God, you're missing out on the best bit," and then kind of hoovering up on the
funny
leftovers.
story about baked potatoes actually, because I homeschooled the children until they were 12. Matt,
Good on you.
long time ago, and then actually Annabelle, so she was 9, but at lunch was always baked potatoes, because it was like,
It was so easy. So cheap, so easy, so versatile. You can just mix up your toppings. I think both, all potatoes I think are brilliant. And then just the other kind of vegetables that I think are worth talking about are things like onions, the allium family. So things like onions, garlic, and leeks. We know that they are particularly good they are good sources of what we call prebiotic fibers. So these are the ones that your gut microbes really do love, and actually potentially are the ones that can cause IBS sufferers to kind of, have a few symptoms, which again, I think can put people off. So sometimes, for example, having a little hack, if that is you, if you do find that you react to this family of vegetables, if you're using spring onions, just using the green part, actually, there's a lot fewer compounds in there that can cause these kind of side effects. Garlic granules tend to be a little bit better kind of tolerated. And actually, even mincing some garlic, putting it into oil, and then just using the oil, again, can give you that kind of flavour that I think a lot of people miss when they've got IBS and they're trying to kind of avoid those kind of ingredients.
Is that the same with the top of the leeks?
The problem with leeks, the top is it can be quite gnarly, can't it? So I think it's all right if you're blending it up. But yeah, otherwise it doesn't really saute and kind of soften like the white bits do.
No, so those are the top ones, and then what else is out there?
Yeah, so those are my veg ones. And then in terms of things like whole grains, again, I think we tend to be put off whole grains, don't we? Because, I don't know, people are talking about blood sugar spikes and kind of crazy things like that. So oats. Oats are my number one, super, super cheap. I would always buy the big kind of jumbo oats. You can get those in all supermarkets. They are particularly high in something called beta-glucans, which is a type of fibre, and that's been associated with lowering your LDL cholesterol. And women, going into peri and then post-menopause, we really do need to start thinking about our heart health, because our risk actually supersedes that of men. Prior to menopause, we tend to fare much better when it comes to heart health. But post-menopause, yeah, we catch up, and then we almost kind of become, worse than men in terms of heart health outcomes. So we really want to be thinking about lowering our cholesterol, despite what all the cholesterol deniers are saying.
Let's just go back to the oats, because there's a lot of controversy over oats. So what is it? Why do people say that you have to be careful of something like oats?
Well, exactly. Why do they? It's kind of, I think it was started by the carnivore crowd, and this kind of obsession as well with the spiking of blood glucose. And we need to remember that in healthy individuals, an elevation in blood glucose is totally normal and totally natural. And what happens is it goes up, and then, 20 minutes, half an hour, 2 hours later, it goes down. It's a sign that you are alive and that your body is working as it should do. It's the equivalent of trying not to raise your heart rate, when you go running. When you go for a run or when you do some exercise, yes, your heart rate increases, and that's a good response. And the fact that it then comes down means that you are, it is physiologically working like it should.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly.
So yeah, this whole kind of demonization of oats drives me crazy, actually. But I do think that people potentially who have a big bowl of porridge do have that kind of slump, maybe half an hour, 2 hours later, and that can put them off. And I totally understand that. So I think it's really important to make sure that you're looking at a balanced meal. It doesn't matter what you're eating, but so that the oats don't have to be like a huge part of it. You can have maybe a smaller portion of oats. I usually do 30, 40 grams, and then I add in some chia seeds, and I've got some soya milk, and I've got some ground flax. And then I mix it all, once it's all cooked through, I will then stir through some Greek yogurt. So it's got plenty of protein in there as well. Add in some nuts and seeds, some berries, and then suddenly you've gone from porridge, which is potentially quite carb heavy and can make you feel a bit sluggish afterwards, to a really nice balanced meal where all the boxes are ticked.
You spent God, I can't remember. I was listening to something you were on the other day, and you mentioned a lot about poo, and let's take the whole issue out of it. Let's not be embarrassed about it. And the only reason I'm saying that is because I know that chia seeds are incredibly good for creating that movement, isn't it? And blueberries and yogurt and chia seeds. I mean, if you've got a problem, that's one of the best ways to have something in the morning.
Well, I know, and lots of us do have that problem. Lots of my clients really complain about sluggish digestion and constipation. We know that estrogen actually helps that movement, that peristalsis movement of food through the gut. So when you go, when you kind of hit your 40s onwards, and even when you're younger at certain times in your cycle, we know that everything can start to slow down. So yeah, I think all hands on deck when it comes to those regular satisfying poos. We've got to lift the lid, to kind of literally lift the lid on poo and stop being so kind of squeamish and British about it, right? Because it's I almost feel like it's a vital sign. It's telling you a lot about your health.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's why they do so many things with samples, don't they? And then there's another area that I think that Tim Spector talks a lot about it, which is the nuts and seeds and all the different things that you can have, because you cover that in your book too, don't you?
Yeah, nuts and seeds are just such an easy one, assuming you're not, you haven't got an allergy.
Yeah.
They are, I buy a mixed bag, I put them in a little Kilner jar, I stick it on my dining room table, the kids will just kind of sprinkle them over whatever they're eating. And then instantly, we're always talking about these 30 different types of unique plants a week, ideally, plus. But if you buy a mixed bag of seeds, you've instantly got 5 or 6 in there, and you just kind of sprinkle it over your porridge or your overnight oats or your chia pudding. It's just such an easy way, to kind of bump those numbers up. And they're also full, not just of fibre, but magnesium, potassium, vitamin E, really, really good. And they're kind of particularly good for as insoluble fibre, so they help to bulk up. Talking of poo again, sorry. It's what I do. They tend to, bulk up your poo, and they kind of help to move everything through. And that in itself can help with lowering cholesterol too, because it actually absorbs cholesterol and kind of helps to excrete it.
The other thing, a brilliant bit that I read in your book was all about the mood as well, because I think that we underestimate what food does to our mood and well-being. We say we're tired, or it's our hormones, but actually food is so important to how we feel.
Absolutely. And it's got to taste good, right? I think potentially why people have been a little reluctant to jump on the fibre train is because they think of it as being really boring and kind of bran and, like bran flakes and kind of just not very appetizing, a bit dusty. When actually, I hope what comes through in the book is that it can be incredibly versatile and really colourful. We're talking about pomegranate seeds and asparagus spears and, kind of buttery chickpeas. It looks... Fibre comes in so many different guises, essentially. So yeah, I really do hope that people will glean that from the book and from the recipes. And they're all very simple recipes too, It's nothing, you're not going to be kind of labouring in the kitchen for hours on end.
I catered and I went to cookery school and things like that. And there was one very old-fashioned book, which was Robert Carey, which is a very old-fashioned cookbook, but it used to have about 50,000 sort of ingredients, and I'd love it. It's all so simple, your recipes, because how many recipes? About 60 recipes in here?
Yeah, there's just over 60 recipes. Yeah, I think it's really off-putting when you're looking, faced with a recipe. You're really tired. We're all kind of stretched and time poor, aren't we? And then suddenly you've got, this kind of long list of ingredients, half of which you haven't got in stock or you've never heard of. So yeah, there's lots of simplicity in there, lots of dried herbs and spices, and lots of the things that I am using are interchangeable. So if you haven't got them, you can easily swap it for something that you have.
And you got into this a lot about midlife and menopause, and how does it affect all the hormones?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So fibre actually plays an important role in hormones in that within your gut, you've got all these microbes that we've already talked about. There is a certain family of those microbes called the estrobolome. And we know that actually they are responsible for metabolizing hormones, particularly estrogen. And that can actually then impact, how many, the level of hormones that you've got circulating throughout your body to a degree. Obviously, it's never going to replace HRT, but interestingly, talking about HRT, they can actually affect how well you metabolize HRT. So it might be, anecdotally, lots of women I speak to, some of them do really well on HRT, some don't tolerate it at all. And we do think that potentially this estrobolome could be one of the reasons why that happens.
How do they know whether or not? So if someone isn't if HRT isn't working for someone, what are the sort of side effects that they're getting showing that it's not working?
Well, there's lots of different reasons. Some people are progesterone intolerant. So they may find that when they take the progesterone part of HRT, they feel much more irritable. All the things that actually we are looking at progesterone to kind of counteract, actually it can make them feel a lot more irritable and kind of hyped up and kind of intolerant. So yeah, there's lots of different reasons, but I think as well, it's just different physiologies, right? We all react in a very different way. And I think, obviously, I'm not a doctor, but I do think when it comes to HRT, a lot of people don't realize it takes a while to kind of adapt and adjust. And you have to kind of talk to your prescriber about potentially, tweaking your dose, because it's not always just a case of, one size fits all.
Yeah, it's such an interesting. There's so many people are for it, and so people aren't. And I've done a lot of work with Dr. Lewis Newson, and it's really interesting, the whole concept. But I think again, it's about the conversation. It's about people talking about it. It's about being out there and getting lots of information that's not just in the surgery, and we definitely don't make claims on this podcast, and this is just people have to take the information themselves and read up about it. But I just think it's important that that these subjects are being covered.
Absolutely. We just need as much information as possible, evidence-based information, so that we can pick and choose what we think is right for us, right? I would hate for anybody to kind of be put off it because they're scared of it, for no reason.
Yeah, and everybody's individual, and I think that's a really important thing to look at, because sometimes you've got to use your own intuition about what feels right, and almost look at say, well, actually that doesn't feel quite right. I'm feeling a bit sluggish on that food. I'm going to change that around. And I think so often people are wanting someone to tell them what to do and how to do it, or to get a test so that teaches them. But actually, sometimes it's like saying, well, why am I feeling a bit like that? Oh, actually, I ate quite a lot of yogurt yesterday. So I notice if I eat a lot of yogurt, that affects me a bit.
Yeah.
Like, when I get into that tub.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I think, like it's particularly in nutrition, there's a lot of trial and error involved, and so there isn't this kind of one size fits all, one solution for everybody. And I also think that some people are quite all or nothing. So it's like you're either in the HRT or you're in the kind of quote unquote natural camp. But it's like, well, actually, they can all kind of rub alongside each other brilliantly. They're all just tools. It's not the be all. HRT isn't the be all and end all. It works. Lots of people can't take it. Lots of people don't want to take it. I do actually use it myself, so I am a huge proponent. But it won't kind of magically give you muscles, and it won't sort out your diet. So you've got to use it alongside other lifestyle measures to really, I think, get the most from it.
Yeah, exactly. So you've written obviously the book on fiber and then your protein. How do the two work together? Because they're separated in terms of a book, but when you're in a daily, when you've got a plate of food, how does your 30 grams of protein look with your 30 grams of fiber?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, visually, when we are taught nutrition, we are taught to kind of visually, you look at your plate, half of it would be fiber, high fiber food, so things like fruit, vegetables, nuts, seeds. A quarter would be complex carbs, so things like whole grains, that's where your sweet potatoes and your brown rice and your quinoa and that kind of thing would fit in. And then a quarter would be protein. So, a quarter of your plate, or usually we talk about a kind of palm-sized piece of protein. And I think potentially that's where lots of people are falling a little bit short, or have been previously. Maybe not now, because there's so much talk about protein, isn't there? And then kind of, a thumb-sized portion of healthy fats. So that might be the olive oil that you've cooked your salmon in. It might be the nuts and seeds. It might be a bit of avocado. So that's a kind of visual guide, I guess. But yeah, they all work alongside each other really beautifully. And the books actually, that they are kind of designed to be a series, I guess you could say. This one, I would say the 30-gram plan is where people can start. And then if you want to really dive into fiber more, that's where the fiber effect comes into play. But I also, within that book, as you know, when I break down all the recipes, I talk about protein as well, because it's not like protein suddenly isn't important. That those three things, fiber, plants, and protein, are the things that I talk about all the time, and I always will. I'm not really into kind of faddy trends. This is my philosophy, I guess.
So how did you get into writing books? Were you approached, because it's Penguin, isn't it? Your book is
Yeah.
that you're publicly, and so how did you get in, and how long does it take you to write a book like this?
Oh my God, that's such a great question. So my first book actually is called The Perimenopause Solution. I wrote that back in COVID. So it was a particularly testing time actually because of COVID. And it meant that we couldn't do a kind of big book launch. We couldn't take it out on the road, so to speak. So it kind of, I felt a little bit like it didn't get the kind of press that it should have done. But then the 30-gram plan, this was actually an online course that I started right at the end of 2023, beginning of 2024. And it just took off. People loved it. I think they loved the numbers, they loved the targets, they loved being shown what to eat, but then kind of also knowing that they could adapt it to suit them, whether they were vegan, veggie, or flexitarian. And on the back of that, I wrote a proposal. Actually, I was approached by my editor. She was like, "Look, it's time you wrote another book." And so it was born. And I mean, it went stratospheric. It was an instant Sunday Times bestseller. So people really, there was something about it that people really loved.
I think you hit the nail on the head just then. It's like a metric. It's something that people can. It's tangible, isn't it? That number.
Yeah, it is. It's tangible. It's also realistic. There's a lot of, particularly with protein, there's a lot of kind of numbers being bandied around. You've got to eat 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, and it all starts to get a little bit kind of unrealistic and outside of people's reach, I think. And there's this kind of propensity, isn't there, for more is more, whereas actually 30 grams of protein is pretty much, I would say, for the average woman, it's pretty much perfect. 25, 30 grams, maybe 35 grams per meal. Yeah. It works really well, and it's really doable. That's a chicken breast, that's a salmon steak, it's half a block of tofu,
Yeah. Have you ever been a vegan or a vegetarian, or have you changed and swapped around a bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I get older, I really don't fancy meat very much. So I've been kind of really put off eating a lot of red meat, actually. There's just something about the texture that I find personally doesn't really work for me so much anymore. But that said, every 3 to 4 months, I will have a huge craving for like a really nice, high quality, juicy burger. And so, yeah, I will listen to my body. I think, I'm always telling my clients that, listen to what your body wants within reason.
Have you got family, children?
Yes, I've got 2 teenagers.
And how are they with all the food? And are they easy to feed? How does it work as a family unit?
They are much better now than they were. I think there's, when your kids are small, there's this real kind of worry, isn't there, about getting all this goodness into them and worrying about whether they're eating Wotsits or fish fingers. And, we tend to kind of really flog ourselves, don't we? And there's a lot of kind of mum guilt and a lot of shame. Actually, I was on a podcast the other day, actually, which was all about mums, and this came up, and it's like, do you know what? As long as you're keeping them alive and feeding them, at the end of the day, you've done a great job. You're juggling a lot of things. So I think obviously we want them to be eating their 5 a day and getting all these different wonderful plants and etc. in them. But essentially, you will do your best. And I think if you're relying on fish fingers, baked beans, these are brilliant. Suddenly they've come under this kind of UPF category, and everyone's being put off them, which is crazy. Fish fingers are a really good source of omega-3s. Baked beans are a really good source of fiber. We've just got to make things a lot easier for ourselves. Life is hard enough.
I think so. I think the other thing is that I something I always realised as a child is that even if you want to rebel against it, if you've been brought up in the environment and that you've had those things in the environment, and that's what you look back on, actually, you might go and drink Coke and eat lots of chips, but we never had chips at home and we never had fizzy drinks. And so actually you might have wanted it as a teenager, but you went off it because it was always in your psyche, if you like, as a child, that you were brought up that actually it wasn't great food. So I think if you just keep the goodness around and they will pick that up. That's how I feel with my children.
I think so too. I think, I don't know any adults who don't eat vegetables. So even if you've got the pickiest kid in the world who won't touch anything green, they will grow out of it and they will be okay. So yeah, I just try with my girls. I just try to model as much as possible, what it means to eat well. But we don't I'm not overzealous about it. There's so many eating disorders at the moment, and I would hate to to get into that territory.
And you've got girls, 2 girls.
2 girls.
Yes,
Yeah.
And that is where it all happens, isn't it? Very much. I mean, it's not that boys don't have eating problems, but it does happen with the girls. And I think it's if you could just give them just something, enjoy food, quite frankly, what it is, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. Unfortunately, it is getting more prevalent in boys and also in middle-aged women, sadly. So, this is a real issue. And I do think a lot of the chat about nutrition doesn't really cover the joy and the fact that it's not about punishing yourself. It's about actually nourishing yourself but enjoying and looking forward to what you're eating.
Just go back to that. So you're saying it's more prevalent in boys now?
Well, no, not more prevalent in girls, but it is becoming an issue with boys. Whereas before, I think perhaps we thought it was mostly, happening in girls and women. Actually, yeah, it's becoming a problem too in boys, which is so sad. Sad for everybody.
Yeah, that is sad. That is sad. Vegetables, organic or not organic? Or does it matter which? And should it be the ones that are in the ground or on top of, because there's a lot of theory, isn't it? That, you better eat organic if they're sitting in the soil or they're sprayed outside.
Honestly, 2/3 of us in the UK, this is really surprising, this statistic, 2/3 of us aren't eating 5 a day. I don't really care whether they're organic or not. I just wish that people were eating them.
That's a really good point. It's really because we get too precious about the whole thing. Oh,
Well, it's also, we're in a cost of living crisis, things are really kicking off out there. Just, whatever you can afford, whatever you think, whatever you can get on your plate that you enjoy, that's it. That's the most important thing.
No, and what's your thoughts on supplementation?
So in terms of fibre, obviously I'm all about food first. Your food is kind of built in this matrix that gives you all these vitamins and minerals, and it helps to slow down the digestion and all of that. But I do actually think for some people that there are some quite good fibre supplements out there actually, and they tend to be blends of prebiotic fibres. So these are the ones that actually feed your gut microbes. They too tend to be quite expensive, unfortunately. But yeah, if you can afford them, they could be, I think, a really helpful addition just to kind of nudge your numbers up. And remember, we're aiming for 30 grams, but you don't have to stop there. The benefits actually continue beyond 30 grams, interestingly. Some of the healthiest communities in the world, so the Hadza tribe who are in Tanzania, they're often quoted, they get 100 grams, 150 grams of fibre a day. So we don't need to stop. If anyone's listening and thinking, oh, well, I'm really nailing my 30 grams, you don't have to stop at 30. You can keep going. And I think particularly for women who are, when we go traveling and things like that, things can really slow down, can't they? So I think actually a fibre supplement in those instances can be quite helpful.
If someone is really stuck and they're listening to this and they don't know where to start, because it's sort of, because some people are stuck, aren't they? They're not eating out, but they're not eating exactly what you're saying here. So where do you start? Where would you help someone?
I would say start with one meal. So usually breakfast, I think, if you set your breakfast up really well, it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the day, can help with appetite, cravings, mood, energy, all of those things. Your metabolism is actually kind of really cranked up first thing in the morning. So you tend to metabolize things really well. You're the most insulin sensitive throughout the day, in the mornings. So start with that meal, with your breakfast. And I would say do something that you can prep, so that maybe that you can batch prep. So something like overnight oats, for example. So you've got your Greek yogurt. I always come back to Greek yogurt because I love it so much. But you can put loads of really lovely things in there. Some jumbo oats, some chia seeds, some flax seeds. Each one can be different. You could have a different berry or a different fruit or some grated apple, in each different pot to kind of keep it interesting, and make 3 of them. You've got them all kind of set up in your fridge. You feel incredibly smug, which is one lovely thing. And it saves you loads of time, and they taste absolutely delicious. And you can kind of tweak them, to suit your taste preferences. And my kids will eat those, actually.
The preparation is fun, actually, when you do that. It's so nice, isn't it? When you prep food a bit, so you go to the fridge and go, oh God, I've got that to look forward to, and it's sick. And sometimes I think I've said this before on my podcast. One of my favourite things is leftovers or things that are prepped in the fridge, because suddenly you go, oh, I've got that in the fridge, and I'm so excited, so hungry.
So brilliant. And it means you're wasting less food. You can put things together, can't you? I mean, I'm all for. Quite often I will get whatever vegetables that haven't been eaten, maybe I've roasted some or there's some leftover peas, popping it all in a pan, adding in a couple of eggs and a splash of egg whites or something. Suddenly you've got this really easy 10-minute frittata type of thing.
Oh, it's so good. What excites you about the future of nutrition and where it's going?
Oh God, I tell you, more often I feel really worried about it, if I'm being absolutely honest with you. I worry about all the misinformation. I worry about, all the pseudoscience, and the fact that some of the loudest voices, particularly on social media, they're not qualified to be talking about nutrition. That really worries me. And that's when you start to, people start to demonize things like oats and stuff like that. So that worries me. What interests me, what excites me, I think there will be more and more research coming out on the gut. And I think that's really exciting. I think we kind of, we're all talking about the microbiome and gut health and fiber. I think actually we're just at the very kind of top of that iceberg. And yeah, we've got some very exciting things coming out.
Do they call it the second brain? What?
Second brain. Yeah, there's this huge kind of link.
Look through the vagus nerve, aren't they? So
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. I've been listening to a few things, for sure.
Yeah, it's an exciting time, and I think with AI we often, understandably we're all a little bit concerned about it and worried about it, but I think it is going to potentially help with some of the research too. So we are looking, I think, at lots of potentially very exciting developments.
So when did your book come out?
So the Fibre Effect came out. When did it come out? God, like a week ago, just over a week ago. So yeah,
Are you on a sort of book launch sort of cycle and going around and book signing and everything else? Because that's how it all happens, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot going on. It's behind the scenes, and people don't really realize, all the kind of the marketing and the media work, and yeah, there's lots of. It's a really exciting time. I've actually. Not to confuse matters, but I've actually got another book coming out in May,
Of course you
this is the 30-gram Plan Cookbook. So this is the 30-gram plan, which was the 70 times bestseller. This is now got, it's all full colour, yeah, and 80 new recipes in there.
We might have to do a third one.
Could you bear it?
Oh, I had actually Dominic Livy came on here a couple of sessions ago, and she came out the day her book launched.
Oh, that's
She was putting
fortuitous.
that, and actually, well, it was so funny because she said my phone's pinging or whatever, and I think it went straight up to the top, right, within sort of like, anyway. But so I feel very fortunate to have such amazing people like you now on this podcast. But I'm so
Oh,
interested in it, and I think it's such a lovely conversation to have, particularly as I think that it's about for me it's about having people who I feel I can really trust and who I know are giving information that I would want to hear, if that makes sense. So
no, that means a lot. Thank you.
three things you'd like to leave our listeners with today.
Okay, so three things I think, and hopefully these will be quite reassuring. You don't have to overhaul everything overnight. You know, like I say, start small. It's interesting to note that your gut microbiome can actually, and obviously you can't see that, but you know that things are changing even if you can't see them on the outside. And your gut microbiome, you know, the kind of the diversity of the microbiome can start to shift within 24 hours when you start to eat more fiber and more kind of plants. So, you know, I think that's really quite that's quite a nice thought.
Yeah.
I think don't worry too much. I think a lot of women will be like, oh my God, you know, I've had this awful weekend where I've just eaten a load of rubbish and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. You know, it's just an isolated incident. It's actually what you eat over months and years, really, that counts. So don't hyperfixate on certain ingredients or one bad meal or, you know, a night of too much booze. We've all been there. Don't worry. And then thirdly, I would say, we've kind of touched on this already, don't forget to enjoy your food. If you hate kale, don't eat it. You know, you've got to look forward to what you're eating. Otherwise, you just take the pleasure out of food completely.
What is the point otherwise? Oh, that's so exciting. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing all that wonderful information so that everybody knows where can they find you.
They can find me, so mostly on Instagram, actually. I just tend to hang out there. So I'm at emma.bardwell and my website is emmabardwell.com. Very easy.
Lovely website. Looked at it earlier today. Guess I'm right on you. But thank you so much, and a brilliant book. And anybody who's listening to it, honestly, it's a must to read. And obviously you're an expert, so we will certainly put something out then. But thank you, Emma, so much.
Oh, that's so kind. It's really nice to see you. Thank you.
Pleasure.